Thank you for tuning in to the Why Marketing podcast. My guest today is Ganesh Padmanabhan, the Vice President of Business Development and Worldwide Marketing at Cognitive Scale. Welcome to the show, Ganesh.
Thank you, Rusty, for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad you were able to join because I'm absolutely fascinated by AI and how it's impacting the world, especially in particular marketers. So can you share with everyone exactly what Cognitive Scale does and what your role is at that company?
Sure. Now, so Cognitive Scale is a, artificial intelligence software company. We're headquartered here in Austin. The company was founded by veterans who were the original driving force behind commercializing IBM Watson at IBM. Serial entrepreneurs who went to IBM to start, take Watson out of the Jeopardy playing lab to commercial applications like healthcare, financial services. And the big opportunity we saw was most of the AI, if you look at the narrative that, for AI in the market, is primarily written by Hollywood, right? Because anybody who talks about AI, they think about Terminator, they think about the big red button, they think about the ex machina and so forth. The reality is, if you use Waze as an app, for example, how it's using real-time intelligence to guide you and navigate your journey back from work to home, to go from home to work, that's the role of AI that's more practical, that's more focused on trying to make a difference to human lives. So what we saw was the opportunity to focus AI as not so much as artificial intelligence, but more as augmented intelligence. So we're an augmented intelligence company with the human in the center of things. How do you use machine learning techniques to make them make better decisions for their enterprises and for their business? So what we have is a software platform that allows you to build intelligent applications fused with AI, fused with machine learning. And you can do it in two different big variants. One is on what we call Engage AI, which is more from a perspective of how do I understand the human in the picture, be it a customer, be it a supplier, partner, at a very detailed level so I can serve them better. Or Amplify, which is more about how do I look at a process, understand the process really well, and then use machine learning to improve the productivity of the process, so the returns of the process. So AI software company headquartered here in Austin. We're about 200 people globally. We have an office in London, New York, and in India, in Hyderabad. And we're venture funded with big names like Norwest Venture Partners, IBM, Watson Ventures, Microsoft M12 Ventures, and Intel Capital. We are, we just came off of one of our biggest years in the company's history, 6-year-old. So we grew over 130% year over year, and we are on a strong trajectory. So
that's awesome. The market that you are focused on as a software, AI software development company, what markets are y'all servicing?
So we think of us as, an enterprise virtualization layer for AI, right? So by definition, anybody who's building applications or infusing their applications with machine learning models or deep learning models or natural language processing, computer vision, can use our platform. That said, our focus has been primarily on the Fortune 2000 enterprises. We focus primarily on the financial services sector, mostly because of the fact that they are a little bit more forward-thinking and adopting these technologies. We also have a very strong presence in healthcare. And then one of our largest emerging growing markets is the TMT industry, which is technology, media, and telco, where we are seeing a lot of big players. But fundamentally, if you to simplify, large complex organizations that has the access and availability to a large customer base and data that they can actually use to make it work, and who's really committed and looking at using an AI-first approach to driving change in their business process, we're the perfect fit for them.
That's awesome. So with machine learning and everything that's coming down the pipe with that, for marketers, obviously, this is something that I'm hearing a lot of conversation around when I'm talking to CMOs and other heads of marketing, what they're doing with their data and how that's helping influence and making decisions easier for them. How are you seeing marketers really embracing and utilizing it?
So, the role of marketing in general is, has transformed and is transforming in the industry, right? Especially when, like Peter Drucker used to say, right, there's only two functions in an enterprise. It's marketing and there's innovation, right? And I would also argue marketing is innovation in a lot of sense. But the fundamental idea about customers are, I tell this to my sales teams here. The bad news is customers don't want to be sold to, right? The good news is they want to buy and they want to engage, right? And that's the big shift in terms of looking at it, saying it's not just sales and marketing; it's two different functions. It is not so much about marketing being a very brand heavy, trying to build the right storylines for it, but marketing is a growth engine right now, right? So the way we're seeing marketers embrace, one, from a marketing perspective, the role of marketing has evolved into not just messaging, not just brand, not just awareness, but about how do I simplify and how do I tell the story in a simple fashion. Storytelling is a big aspect of it. The second thing is a growth engine. The notion of how do I use the right latest and greatest technologies to go power those decisions in a more real-time fashion is important. Now, contrasting that to AI or compare, bringing it together to what we're seeing where leading marketers, like I'll take an example, Dell, for example, is using AI to understand 300 odd million customers that they have across the globe, enterprises, entities, organizations, governments, individuals. And, AI has, gives you the ability, or things like machine learning or techniques like machine learning, gives you the ability to understand data across multiple sources that you have about that customer, be it your CRM database, be it the social stream that the customer is tweeting about something not working in a product, be it your order data, be it understanding where through content syndication sites, where they're actually living and residing and what kind of engagement they're having. Understanding the customer at a very intimate 360-degree level, companies like Dell and other big, large corporations are making a huge difference in the way they can really predict what these customers will want in their next step of the buying journey, right? And so they're using AI to actually power those journeys and move them towards a favorable decision for their brand, for their products, their customers, and stuff. So, but overall, from a marketing perspective, there's multiple things that are happening. One is there's still a big faction of the industry that's still focused on looking at marketing and technology from a perspective of how do I, from a perspective of just data, right? And there's projects around CDI or the common customer data infrastructure that everybody is looking at trying to pool all the data that they have about their customer across multiple trends. And that's where most of the industry is. And there's a lot of forward-thinking marketers who are looking, because that's a never-ending exercise. If you start collecting data from all sources and putting one place to make decisions, that'll keep going and on and on and on. So what we're seeing more forward-thinking organizations do, or marketers do, is they pick a problem. Like, how do I predict which segment do I focus? If it's a financial services organization, as an example, how do I pick the right segment to focus the launch of a new product, right? If you're an asset manager and you're actually launching a green fund, right, that's all about sustainable industries and stuff, how do I know? Because the traditional knowledge you have about your direct customers through the brokers are like their portfolio holdings and their demographics, right? How do I know that there is an investor out there who's very, very focused on trying to invest sustainably and so forth, right? So you can now use techniques like machine learning to extract that data across multiple places that these customers live and then power those campaigns in a much more intelligent fashion, right? So that's where we're seeing the momentum on that. And then there's a lot of marketing organizations who are using, techniques like machine learning to understand the impact of their brand, right? We did some work with NBC Universal, who were looking at what makes a good Super Bowl ad. And the whole idea was like, traditionally, it was like a group of experts who looks at an ad, look at some Nielsen ratings that come out of after that, and kind of say, it's probably because we have a really, attractive model in that ad that the ad did really well, right? But now understanding, correlating the aspects of the ad or of similar ads against the ratings that they actually got across multiple fields, you can pretty easily get very precise. And that's exactly what NBC Universal did, where they actually went and gave us about 3 years worth of Super Bowl ad data, right? And they gave us the Nielsen ratings, the USA Today ratings. And we came back with very clear recommendations. If you're building an ad for a consumer product, the best scenes, the best part of the ad that is going to drive the most rating and engagement for you is going to be a beach setting versus a forest setting, right? If you're actually, if you have a pet in the ad in the scene for a long enough time, you're wasting your money on the expensive actor who's also in there because the eyeballs and the engagement is because there's a pet on the screen in the scene, right? So things like that take a very complex problem like that, break it down to say, use data and techniques like machine learning to understand what exactly is happening. It's powering the way their ad sellers engage with their clients, right? So now you can go have an intelligent conversation. If you're sitting in front of Frito-Lay's versus another CPG company, what is the best use of their ad spend, and what kind of things do they need to have on the ad? You can use AI to actually make those recommendations to those clients. So there is a variety of different use cases within marketing for AI, and we're seeing most folks, start in one place or the other. It's an exciting field.
I would definitely say exciting. So you've got this great role. What were you doing before Cognitive Scale, and how did you end up finding your way there?
I'm a mechanical engineer by education. I've had a career which is, a couple of themes in my career, in my background. One is around, I've always been attracted towards any new technology or changes in the industry powered by a technological change, right? And so it started when I graduated out of college, in mechanical engineering, I saw the big boom for the internet. This was, early 2000s. So it was, the internet was the big thing, and web became the way, the mode in which information was dispersed and transferred and stuff. So I didn't even work a day in mechanical engineering. I actually ended up teaching classes to get myself through college, but I ended up as a software engineer for a storage company, which was selling storage systems to cloud manufacturers. So I wanted to get close to it. I want to understand how this business is done. From that, I joined, another company, but I was in engineering for the first 6-7 years of my career, and was very much focused on understanding the nuts and bolts of building. What does it take to build, applications using software? What does it mean? What does it take to actually understand how do you solve business problems using software, right? So that was the whole thing. So I did a variety of software engineering roles there. Then, as they say in engineering, then I moved over to the dark side, business side of sales and marketing. My first thing, I spent about a decade at Dell Technologies now, and Dell EMC, like that. And, that's where I like to believe that I grew up in the company, right? I grew up, my formational years were actually at Dell. And I did a variety of different roles. I helped start the first cloud business for Dell. So this was about developing and launching the first application that enterprises use to deploy their own private clouds. I was playing a product management, product marketing role for that function. I ended up launching the convergent infrastructure solutions business at Dell. Then I, slowly moving over from just product management to sales and business development. And then I was responsible for the big data analytics, the high performance computing business. And when I left Dell about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we had built the youngest billion-dollar business at Dell, which comprised of all these emerging disparate technologies like application-specific infrastructure, high-performance computing, big data analytics, all these different variants. So, but the common theme in my career across the whole thing was about being gravitated towards disruptive technology that is changing driving an order of magnitude change in the market. So 3 years ago, I had the big realization that I've spent like a pretty good run at Dell, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to go do something entrepreneurial, go back to the roots of how I started my career and so forth. And I started a venture around looking at, and I knew I wanted to do something with data and AI. And I started a venture which is more around understanding when algorithms and black box algorithms make decisions. How do you explain that to a human by telling them why it came up with that decision, right? And one thing led to the other before we really even took off. One of the investors I sat down with happened to be the executive chairman of Cognitive Scale. He convinced me, obviously he was way more convincing than I was to him. So he convinced me that he actually made me to come meet with the team. I spent a lot of time with the team, and I saw that it was a perfect fit to, work with a group of people who's looking at this disruptive technology and how do you make it real? I mean, everyone else I found, most of the players, most of the companies that I spoke with at that time, had this, lofty visions and views of AI, but the goal of how do I put that to practice to improve enterprises and human lives was fundamentally, flawed because everybody was looking at replacing the human in the picture, right? And Cognitive Scale at the time, and even now was very unique in that aspect of looking at augmented intelligence. How do I put the human in the center of everything and help give them enough insights to make better decisions, right? So that was a natural fit in the mission and vision they were trying to drive. And, my skills that I bring in was actually being able to scale businesses from, like a couple of dozen employees to, hundreds of employees, a couple of $1 million to, billions of dollars, if you will. So that was the background that I came with, and it's been a blast.
Definitely is kind of the future when you look at the technology itself. I mean, that is really where everything seems like it's really heading when it comes to the whole data science part of it. One question I had is when you were talking about, you had mentioned artificial intelligence early on, but it was really augmented intelligence. What's the difference between the two?
If you think about it, right now, who said that? I think it was Fei-Fei Li, a Google researcher, Stanford professor. She made this comment, a very popular, famous comment, like there is nothing artificial about artificial intelligence, right? I mean, it's by far the farthest from artificial. The whole field of AI, you can date back to, 60 to 70 to 100 years, right? Where there's been a lot of research and cumulative research that have happened. And it all started with how do I actually make sure that, the big difference in the core technology is, while traditional software, you write rules for the software to follow, you treat software and machine in AI as more a learning entity. You kind of give them it's kind of like you build a child with the ability to learn. So it can learn from the interactions of the data that you feed the algorithm, and it learns to do something, right? Now, it introduces other complexities, but the whole idea was about how do you make sure that you instead of explicitly programming routines and algorithms, you tell the algorithm to learn from the data you're going to send them, right? So that's the whole idea behind this whole field of artificial intelligence. And if you look at there's a spectrum of different applications you can do. On the one hand, you have pure automation, right? So there is a form that, let's say we all fill up forms when we go to hospitals and go to any kind of insurance companies, right? And even if it's an online form, the act of actually looking at each of the fields of the form and taking that and capturing and putting it in the right place, right file and stuff like that, it's a human action, but it can be automated by mimicking the way humans do it, right? How do I read and understand a text out of that particular form, right? How do I know that if it says name, I should look for another column that says name on the spreadsheet, so I copy that one from here to here. That to me is like automated intelligence, right? So that's one end of the spectrum. On the extreme other end of the spectrum is things like autonomous driving, self-driving cars, where you have an entirely no human in the loop, that they're completely, it's a machine that is programmed to, almost mimic a human thing. But the reality where that market is right now, it's very much on a narrow basis, right? You can do it for one function. You can do self-driving cars. But, there is enough complexity, as we've all read in the press about even the self-driving cars, right? Understanding, there's constant learning happening, but make that self-driving car also go pick up groceries and come back. That's a whole different domain of problems that you got to go solve, right? So that to me is the other end of the extreme, which is autonomous intelligence, right? All the way AI as being completely autonomous, right? On one hand, you have automated, the other hand, you have autonomous. And somewhere in the middle is actually, okay, how instead of trying to go all the way to the right and make it a full-blown human-like kind of entity, how do I use these techniques, the underlying techniques like machine learning, like natural language processing, like computer vision, to augment the human who's making decisions in the picture? So hence this whole field. I mean, it's not a very popular term, but it's nice to actually tell the story that way. But to understand at the core of it, right, AI should really be augmented intelligence. It's about giving the user in the middle. Like I took the vase example, right? Another example: if you're an account payable or account receivable personnel in an accounting department, and you're looking at POs, and you're looking at contracts, you're looking at multiple things, surfacing them insights across all these documents so they can make better decisions. That is augmented intelligence, right? And when you look at enterprises, when you look at organizations, primarily at the heart of it, organizations and enterprises are still people entities, right? And, be it front office, be it middle or back office, all the operations are built around people that are actually performing certain function. And the most attractive side of the market in AI is empowering those people to make better decisions and make their lives easier, right? That to me is, you can think of as an augmented intelligence definition for AI.
So in the case of a job responsibility, such as either a buyer, merchandiser, or even a creative person, it seems like AI can help those job roles be done more effectively. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So, like the example that I took on NBC, right? There, you're not trying to replace the artist who's actually looking at ads and deciding what's the creative elements to do that. But you're backing their creative decisions with data that shows, hey, by the way, if you have an ad that has got an attractive gentleman in it, if it's in an outdoor scene that does in mountains, and you run it in the second half of the game, you're going to have a much higher return on your ad spend, right? So it's backing the creative with the quantitative decision-making prowess, right? That's one part on the creative side. If you're even like, as you took the case of a merchandising example, right? The amount of data that we have right now around in the world has far exceeded the human ability to understand and comprehend and make sense out of, right? So at a core level, even if you're the most, even researchers who are doing molecular research in pharmaceuticals, the pharma industry, are using techniques like machine learning to understand what does it mean. It's not that they can't do it, but can they do it at that rate, at the pace, and with the amount of volume and veracity of data that they have to deal with, right? So it's like, think of technologies like machine learning as tools to empower the human and making them do what they already do much better and much better.
I would think that for any CMO or other C-level executive, having tools like AI has to be incredibly empowering and helpful and help guiding them down the path to make better and faster decisions for their organizations.
Yeah, I fundamentally believe that. No, I totally agree. And I fundamentally believe that the role of the CMO, and it's less of a back office, middle office trying to empower everybody else. And it's become more front and center, right? And there are three key tenets that I see are fundamental for CMOs to think about. One, it all ends and starts with storytelling. They have to be the chief storyteller, right? They have to ensure that the messaging is simple enough so they're addressing multiple people. People have the attention span. Humans' attention span is less than that of a goldfish right now. It's like 8 seconds, right? So how do you capture the interest, the engagement, the attention in the most simplest fashion, in the most powerful fashion? It's incredibly important. So storytelling is a big thing. That includes things like, how do I look at content variety? How do I look at third party telling my story, and so forth, right? The second thing, and this is where the big change has happened over the last, ever since, over the last decade or so, is CMOs having a seat on the table to drive growth for the company, right? That includes, we know it in terms of demand generation and techniques like account-based marketing and so forth. But the whole notion of how do I use data and analytics to make better decisions, to target and get a much higher rate of growth than I can get when I just do a spray and pray using traditional approaches. And then the third aspect of, and CMOs by definition is or should be considered the chief growth officer for the company as well. And then lastly, the role of technology and the ability to actually look across, this different landscape of technology and being a technology first, taking a technology first approach to actually driving, not just improving productivity and addressing things, but even showcasing to the customer how ahead you are than the rest of the pack to differentiate yourself. Now, I'll tell you simple examples, right? One is like streamlining operations and using ROI and so forth. But on the other hand, you have the opportunity to not just talk about thought-leading topics, but usually put that in practice and go deliver it. Like, we do this with our customers. When somebody comes on our website, we set up a special landing page. They come in, and when they actually finish reading some stuff in there, we tell them what did we learn about them in that interaction and show it back to them, right? Now, that changes the perspective of what the technology can do for them. Now, you can apply the same thing for a merchandising side, right? Help people visualize it. But using the power of technology to go drive your core engine is another fundamental tenet for a CMO today.
The data has to be overwhelming for a lot of folks. And, when you were sitting there talking about how AI is driven based off of all the data that's being inputted in. So I guess it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not giving it good, strong, accurate data, you're not going to be getting the results that you need.
Data is still the Achilles heel for AI, no doubt. And I think part of this, as you said, it's garbage in, garbage out. There's multiple approaches to being, there are statistical techniques applied to actually make this thing. There's also the traditional approach of how do I clean the data, make it usable kind of thing. What I've seen most marketing organizations do is embark on this whole notion of how do I organize my data across multiple places into one common location, which is cleaned up. And, so the CDI project is gaining a lot of momentum in the industry for marketing as a use case. And, traditional approaches like master data management and things like that's also gaining momentum. That's one way to approach it. The other way to approach it is actually, I am a fundamental believer that you can't start with the premise that I have to get my data in order before I start applying AI and techniques, right? You got to do both. And you got to learn from the interactions and see what is missing. So there is enough statistical techniques that allows us to understand when a model is actually delivering, and a machine learning model is delivering wrong predictions that is way off the chart, we can understand which factors, what kind of data, and what parameters actually led to, you kind of get an idea what led to that decision. Now you can start looking at where do I look for, in the data pool, what do I look to go clean up so I can get the right prediction.
So you're using AI to actually clean the data as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of research and statistical techniques identified to do it. Now, the application of that techniques into products that allow you to do that. When Amazon last year published a paper on how do I use AI to clean the data to go get it in. Now there's a fundamentally new approach that we're seeing a lot of forward-thinking organizations are getting into, which is the notion of synthetic data, right? So everybody has data, and there's enough data. You don't know what is good versus not, but they're all thinking of how do I create data that I can use with the sole purpose of training my model so I get a good head start, and then let the real data train the models as it go along, and it gets better, right? So the whole notion of synthetic data is also coming in. And there's a lot of ways you can do it. There's like simple examples that you hear is image tagging, right? There is the Google ImageNet, which allows users, you can go in and you say, that's a cat, it's a cat, it's a cat. So there's a human tagging it, right? And which also tells me, like, when you think about how the AI, there's enough debate about how AI is going to fundamentally change the labor market and the makeup of the labor market. There's going to be another whole, data factories, synthetic data factories, and those kind of business models coming into there, which will have humans prepare and tag data for machines to understand. There's a lot of different, there's a whole plethora of different things that are happening there.
My mind is already like spinning. So if I'm just going in random directions, I apologize. It really is. It's fascinating to me. What are you the most excited about down the road for AI?
It's a good question, right? We are still very early in this market for AI, right? And if you look across, I tend to believe AI still has the one problem, right? Which is, if you look at the talent for building machine learning algorithms and so forth, is so concentrated in the top 1% of organizations, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Netflix of the world, who can afford these expensive engineers to go build models and algorithms. So a couple of things that excite me when I think about it, I'm still very optimistic around this, is one, we're still very early in the innings for AI. What we'll start seeing is more and more democratization of building blocks to build AI on your own than having to depend on a PhD to go do it. So there's that whole, companies like Google, companies like Amazon, Microsoft are very heavily focused on making every developer an AI developer, for example. One of our goals at Cognitive Scale is the same too, right? Which is, how do I lower the amount of skills and, background and knowledge that you need to have to start building AI applications, right? You give them the tools to go do it. The other thing that is actually exciting when you think about AI, right? The number of applications that are now, even though we say about AI is everywhere in the way you actually, when you do search, you're being indexed, right? When you interact with a conversational AI system on a chat with a chatbot, there is AI in play. When you're getting recommendations on your Facebook feed, when you're seeing an ad, there's all AI in the background. We're still hardly scratching the surface with AI and what AI can do, right? The one exciting thing to look forward is the merging of the physical and digital worlds, right? How we think about augmented reality and AR, VR, virtual reality and kind of stuff. There is opportunities where you can blend the two worlds. There's this new phase emerging called spatial computing, right? The ability to anticipate your actions across physical and digital domains, and allowing you to actually use the space around you to go do it. So there's a lot of those exciting things, the application of machine learning and AI kind of techniques into that is going to be huge. We still haven't solved the big challenge around data, right? And when I say data, it's like, it's a pretty interesting model. If you look at, we as individual users produce all the data, collected by the big corporations, and they turn it, change it, do magic with it, and sell us back products. So we are the producer of the data, and we're also the consumers of the output of what you can do with the data. Something wrong with that model, right? I mean, there is a disruption coming on that front too. But in general, also on the AI field, what's ahead, we'll start seeing that, like you saw with GDPR, the way to actually ensure that users' data and privacy is maintained. We're going to start seeing regulations coming in. Government's actually saying, if you're using a semi-automated system or an automated system to make decisions on smart governance, you better be able to explain why you came up with the recommendations. It can't be a black box approach. So this whole field of responsible AI is coming into emerge, which basically looks around, how do I explain my decisions that an AI made? How do I ensure that you have the rights and consent of the data that you're using across multiple domains? How do you make sure that there is traceability of how your decisions are being made and what led you to make those decisions, and so forth? So there, and then bias and fairness, right? I mean, we have all heard of the stories of the soap in the toilet, which doesn't recognize darker hands when they actually try to get the soap, because the visual recognition algorithm was trained with a lot of white hands. So when a colored hand goes in, they can't see it, right? Heard about the chatbot that turned the racist when, bots started training it with wrong data. So there's all these elements of the dark side of AI is still very much in there. There's all these dark players, the Russian hacking story. So there is a whole body of work that is still needed to be done, and it's being done, that I'm really excited about, which is bringing AI from just being another tool in the bag that's doing something to more into the forefront of actually helping us lead better lives through responsible use of the technology, to ensuring you're empowering the right people to go do it. So there's all this entire thing, like we're still way too early in the innings for AI. And, we're starting to see the adoption from both consumers in the way we experience the AI-driven experiences and forward-thinking enterprises in putting that to practice. We have hardly scratched the surface. It's going to go be a huge wave. It's an industry for the next 2 decades or more.
Yeah, just hearing what the potential can be, it's pretty amazing. So appreciate your thoughts on that. And as one thing I wanted to do is before we kind of wind out the show is I wanted to talk about reflection because I think it's so important for us to look back at our careers, all the experiences that we've gained. If we could go back into time, what would be the one piece of advice, Ganesh, you would give your younger self if you had the opportunity?
Two things, right? I mean, if I'm graduating college today, or if anybody graduating college today, I would actually, tell them when they got another 20, 30 years of their active career left, or even more or less, they should start looking at more. There was a time when I was getting out of college, there was this whole movement to be a specialist in one domain, right? Mm-hmm. And, I used logarithmic tables when I was in high school to actually calculate logarithms. Nobody knows what the heck it is right now, right? And I'm not even that old. But then people started using calculators and stuff. So the whole notion that the parts that you thought that were most important, that you had to be a domain expert to go do, is becoming less and less relevant because you can have an AI co-pilot help you with that job, right? Help you with those problems, right? If you have to have a really hard computational problem, rather than trying to build my own R or Scala code in Excel, I would just have, a specialist do it, or, use a query machine that actually gives me that computational thing, right? Yeah. So if you're getting out of college today, I would actually say focus on, being more broader, learn about more and more fields, right? Hone in on the other part of you, which is not the technical expertise, but the interpersonal skills, the ability to work with teams, the ability to motivate and inspire people, the ability to bring a group of people together across a common goal, leadership, emotional excellence, and so forth, emotional quotient. That's the way you actually have to go. I mean, I would say you should power and improve that part of your career. Now, if you're still like I got a 5-year-old, right? And somebody asked me this question in another podcast or an interview, where what would you make them study when they go to college? And honestly, currently my answer is liberal arts, right? Just help them, because the quantitative side of the world is becoming more and more driven and owned by machines. the qualitative side of the world is going to be impossible for the machines to actually go to, at least in the foreseeable future. But that's where the talent pool, that's where the people, the high earners are going to be. That's the kind of skills that you need to actually start looking at honing in. And, at one point, somebody said this, I can't remember who said this, like, technology over time has made people more dumb, right? Because, we do less and less things. But the opportunity right now is actually to go back to the things that are so uniquely human, that even other living species can't replicate, like storytelling, the ability to actually go hold a complex, abstract thought in your head and work towards it, break it down into approachable things. So those kind of human first kind of skill sets is what we as humanity needs to hone in the future.
I think it's perfect advice. And I definitely think the art of storytelling is slowly getting lost every single generation because there's no need to. They can just look it up on and Google it. I mean, it's definitely something I think that we all should be taking a look at. So thank you for sharing that. And that kind of takes us now to the end of the podcast. Unfortunately, I definitely want to make sure we get you back on the schedule sometime down the road because I got a lot more questions, especially after my head starts to unwind a little bit on this.
This has been great, and I look forward to actually chatting more, and I look forward to the podcast when it's published. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. So for anybody else that is listening online, make sure to hit like and share with your different friends and colleagues, because that is how we're going to continue to grow the Y Marketing Podcast family. So thank you very much, Ganesh, for being a part of our show, and for everyone else.
Bye-bye.